Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of hardcore literature like Twilight. I'm Adrian Fort.
And I'm Dalton Gentry.
And we're here for more brilliance from a classic American text.
Yep. You good?
Why don't you tell them what we read? Do your part here. I can't do all of the lifting.
So, this is Adrian Reed's Twilight.
Hey.
Yes.
Cool it.
Okay, so, this is Adrian Reed's Twilight.
Hey. Cool the sarcasm.
I don't know what you want me to do. Do you want me to talk about the Twilight?
I want you presentable for the camera.
This is Adrian Reed's Twilight. Chapters 16, 17, and 18.
It's better.
The newest series here on Strip Cover Lit.
It's better.
You feel better about that? Let's talk about what happened. We begin with some more lore building. We get a little bit from the Cullens. We get a little bit from Carlisle, which I like. And we discover that vampires apparently love baseball. So that's a thing.
Who doesn't?
During the baseball game, a trio of vampires arrive early and appear to be warded away a little bit from Bella. Some sly words from, Carlisle, we got a lot to learn about each other, let's go back to the house. But Edward believes that the hunt is on, and a plan is forged to hide Bella from her vampire nemesis. That's what we've got to work with. Adrian, where do you want to start?
Well, you, in your just sort of pissy attitude, wanted to talk about the melodrama that's here. And that's true, there's some melodrama here.
Some melodrama.
The whole thing with the boy vampire who wants to eat her sort of comes out of nowhere, sort of manufactured. I will say that this Laurent character, in my mind, absolutely played by Steve Donahue.
Okay.
The one who's just, he's not, he's immediately judgmental, but accepting at the same time. Like, there's a moment where he says something like, but she's not a vampire. And how often have you heard that tone from Steve Donahue?
That's fair. We should recast Twilight. We should recast Twilight with BookTube.
We should.
That should be a tag. Write that down.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Write that down.
That'd be interesting, something like that. Going back to the beginning of this, Edward the Murderer Hunter. Remember that?
What? Edward the Murderer Hunter?
Yeah, that's what he was doing. That's when he decided to eat people.
Okay.
He was hunting down murderers and other ne'er-do-wells.
It just sounds weird when you say the Murderer Hunter. I'm like,
yeah,
he's hunting
I was
another
expecting
vampire.
you to be able to construct the English along with me, Dalton. Maybe that's why you don't understand the phenomenon of Twilight. Is because you're just not creative enough with the English language.
We got 25 minutes to go. Go on. You were saying.
Edward the Murderer Hunter is a book I would read.
Okay.
It's there was a TV show.
Dexter. Yeah.
That's Dexter, but you eat people.
Okay.
Right? That's interesting.
Dexter was an interesting show.
And this was way before Dexter, right?
No. I want to say this was close to the same. Dexter was actually a book before it was the film.
Oh, was it? I had no idea.
Darkly Dreaming Dexter, I believe, was the first one. And off the top of my head, I could not tell you.
Was it a book
author.
or a comic book?
A book.
Really?
Christ, I cannot remember the author's name right now. I'm sorry.
So this is 2005.
I would say that Dexter may have been more established at that point in time. I also think the 2005 era would have been right about the time Dexter was on television.
Really?
Yes. Like, we will have to double check that. Maybe I'm just talking out of my ass, but it is an interesting idea. The idea that the bad guy hunts bad guys.
Yeah.
Intriguing, yes. And I would agree with you, that does seem to be an acceptable story, something I would like to read. Every little bit where we get any of the Cullens' history, I think is much more interesting than the story that we have.
And that's where I was going, is there's more lore there.
Absolutely
right?
so.
There is backstory here that is interesting and dark versus Harry Potter, which is just bad.
Also the the idea of Carlisle starving himself? I don't know where I want to go with this. Forcing himself to not consume based on moral principle is an interesting dynamic in the vampire world.
Because it is... So, yeah, because the idea of eating people is a moral conundrum in the real people world. Right?
And I know as much as you love Interview with a Vampire, you get that. You do get that idea. I can't remember the names. It's been a long time. But one of the vampires goes through that phase where he doesn't want to consume people. He lives on rats.
Was that Lestat? Lestat? Was that
Vampire.
Lestat?
I don't believe it was Lestat. But he lives on rats. So this idea is there in this vampire fiction culture. It's always been there in the mythos. But this is the first time we actually see it actualized, where someone has gotten past that point and realized that they can sustain their life, what they call their life now, living off animals instead of humans.
Maybe not the first. I mean, obviously the guy did on the rats in Interview with the Vampire, but
He did, yes.
but
But this is the first time where that has gone from just establishing that to this is full bore my lifestyle, and it's not a lifestyle of suffering.
right.
You are giving up a bit. You are making sacrifices. But obviously, Dr. Cullen is a very successful man. He's trained himself so much that he can work as a doctor around blood.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And that backstory is what makes that interesting. And I will again argue, as I did last week, that the mythos and the lore building is the most interesting thing we've been given so far.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It is.
It's also interesting to think that 2004, 2005-ish, probably about the last time you could have gotten away with writing this story.
You think so?
Because the idea of the doctor who wanders around is too, what?
That's a good point.
You can't do it now. You can't even imagine it now.
Okay.
It's everything is, you've got a license for this, a license for that, accreditation for this, you know. Everything is so heavily regulated anymore, which, I don't know, for the better and the worse, it's so much harder to get a start in anything anymore.
Okay.
Right?
Dexter. I believe the author's last name is Lindsay. It's going to drive me nuts, this entire video. I'm so sorry. But anyway, we do get a bit of a throwback here. Let me see if I can find this particular page. But we are talking about the backstory, a little bit of lore, a little bit of mythos building. And it is mentioned that, there are other vampires. He was studying in Italy when he discovered the others there. They were much more civilized and educated than the wraiths of the London sewers. This is something that we may have glazed over a little bit, but we've been introduced to before. When Bella first had this notion that Edward was a vampire, what did she do? She researched. And what were the vampires that she narrowed down that maybe this is this guy? They were the Italian vampires. More sophisticated Italian vampires. So we are getting a bit of a throwback to previous research, which I do like. There's some good continuity there, and I'm okay with that. As much as the research in the beginning was absolutely ridiculous. So obviously, that's going to come back. That's going to come back to haunt us.
So if this was at the end of the time when you could write about a wandering doctor, it was also at the beginning of the time where you could write about internet research.
True.
Right?
Very true.
So this is really, this book is a product of a strange crux in time.
It is. That's a good way of putting it. And it is something that's not normally appreciated when you're reading this text, the time frame and what's going on during this time.
Right.
But it is a little snippet of history that you can't really recreate now.
And it's also the paranormal world, the not zoological, what's the...
Cryptozoological.
Cryptozoological world is also much easier to debase now. Right?
Absolutely. Fueled by the internet.
Right. Well, its destruction was also fueled by the internet.
Absolutely. Both its destruction and its popularity, I would argue, fueled by the internet.
So it's this whole idea of vampires. Nobody believes in that today, which is sort of toyed with in there, that now they can walk among us. But it is the same freedom that allows a traveling doctor to exist that removes the ability of vampires to be around, right? So it's still this weird area there.
It is a weird area, but I think it's a good dynamic.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're reading this. And as we had the conversation before, this wasn't that long ago. My, how times have changed.
Yeah.
Anyway, what do you want to get into here?
There's a strange line here on 355. Jessica, Mike, the dance, the school, they all seem strangely irrelevant at the moment. That is a common sentiment after someone's death, right?
Okay.
Here, we're getting that sentiment after learning that there are people who live forever.
Interesting.
So it is ironic there.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things going on with this that I want to say they're innovative in the subgenre of vampire fiction. And it's little things like that that add a little flavor to it.
Yeah.
It complements it quite well. It gives a little more credit where credit is absolutely due to Stephanie Meyer. I don't know. They seem so few and far between and so buried in there that if you are not actively looking for them, you're not going to find them.
Aren't you supposed to be an active reader?
You are supposed to be an active reader, but I would argue...
Are you admitting that you are a passive reader,
I will
Dalton?
argue that the majority of people who read Twilight, who read Twilight when it came out, were not doing so critically.
Oh, now you're just making a base accusation. Isn't it also true of Harry Potter heads that they were not reading critically, and that's why they let so much racism pass by?
Okay.
Isn't racism a little bit worse than clunky storytelling?
Okay.
Isn't it?
See what you did there? That's fun.
Isn't it?
Isn't it fun? So you want to talk about the baseball game?
No.
What do you want to talk about then? That was my next point.
Billy,
Okay.
when they roll up to what's her
Charlie?
name? What's her name?
Isabella Swan.
No, it's a Belle. When they roll up to Bella's house and they're inside, and Billy's again this clunking idiot, right? Just thuds around and says stupid stuff, which I'm hoping there's a payoff for that at some point. But Billy sends Jacob back to the car to find an imaginary picture that he left in the car. That is a gorgeous bit of writing.
It's well done. It really is.
He needed Jacob to help him get in the house. They got in the house. He needed Jacob to be gone. He sent him back with a brilliant plot.
It's well done.
And then the plot got to progress with Bella and Billy.
And what we're looking at here is, granted, in the story here, Billy is trying to address the fact that, hey, I know what's going on, you know what's going on, this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Billy is doing what he thinks is best here. But if we look at this, analyze a little bit, we're starting to look at some psychopathic, sociopathic tendencies with Billy here. He used Jacob to get into the door. Then he used Jacob to buy him some time. He's keeping his tools sharp. Jacob is there for utility and purpose, and that's the only reason Jacob's there.
That is often how young people are treated, though.
Okay.
Is that fair?
I
mean, how...
Yes and no. But once it comes to fruition that there is no picture in the car, we do see this was all just a well-thought-out ploy. And I will agree with you, credit where credit is due. It's a lovely little touch.
Say it again. Say it again.
It's a lovely little touch. Credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
Anyway, I would like to see that dynamic explored a little bit more, especially if we're going to be continuing forward with this series, because it is interesting. It is that age-old fantasy ideal, vampires versus werewolves. We haven't really seen that come to a peak just yet, but I think it would be an interesting dynamic if we're talking character dynamics, as we usually do. Anyway.
I thought this was an interesting... If you're talking about character dynamics, I thought this was a dynamic set of circumstance on 356 and 357. Bella's speaking here. Well, this afternoon I just hung out around the house. Only the very recent part of this afternoon, actually. I tried to keep my voice upbeat, but my stomach was hollow. And this morning I was over at the Cullens. Charlie dropped his fork. Dr. Cullen's place? He asked in astonishment. I pretended not to notice his reaction. Yeah. What were you doing there? He hadn't picked his fork back up. Well, I sort of had a date with Edward Cullen tonight, and he wanted to introduce me to his parents. Dad? It appeared that Charlie was having an aneurysm. Dad, are you all right? You were going out with Edward Cullen? He thundered. Uh-oh. I thought you liked the Cullens. He's too old for you, he ranted. We're both juniors, I corrected, though he was more right than he dreamed. Wait, he paused. Which one is Edwin? Edward is the youngest one. With the reddish-brown hair, the beautiful one, the godlike one? Oh, well, that's... He struggled. Better, I guess. I don't like the look of the big one. I'm sure he's a nice boy and all, but he looks too mature for you. Is this Edwin your boyfriend? It's Edward, Dad. Is he? Sort of, I guess. You said last night you weren't interested in any of the boys in town. But he picked up his fork so I could see that the worst was over. Well, Edward doesn't live in town, Dad. He gave me a disparaging look as he chewed. And anyways, I continued, it's kind of an early stage, you know. Don't embarrass me with all that boyfriend talk, okay? That is an interesting dynamic there.
Okay.
He's mad at her because he's got the wrong one in mind, but he knows everybody in town. But they're not in town, so that's why he doesn't know Edward versus his brother, right? So he's mad at her because he's her dad, and she lied to him. And because she likes boys, because dads get to be mad at daughters who like boys. And she's lying to him, but she's sort of telling the truth. And she notices that he drops his fork and he doesn't pick it up. So he's in that mental constipation.
Okay.
He can't get past that moment. And once everything's okay, he goes ahead and picks the fork up. But that's when he lays the bombshell on her. Well, you said you didn't like any of the boys in town, right? And she says it's kind of early, so don't talk. That is an interesting scene. That is a dynamic scene.
Call it what you will. I will yield. It is a realistic scene. That seems very much like a conversation that a father and daughter would have.
That's well written.
About the first boyfriend coming over. And granted, realistic, we can call it well written. That's another way to put it. However, better helps you sleep at night.
However what?
But anyway, I like it. It works. I had a point that I was going with here, and I kind of toned out when you were reading, so I don't know where I wanted to go at that point.
You toned out because you can't appreciate fine literature and a great reading voice.
Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. But it does seem to work, and I will give you that. That does seem to be the classic dad move. It does. And there's always those little ticks. And like at this point, Bella has obviously understood what her father's tick is. He stopped eating. That's the bad part. When my father takes off his glasses and calmly sits them down, he's going to hurt someone.
You know you're in for an ass whooping.
Yeah, it's coming. So I get it. It seems to be a working relationship. It's realistic. We can call it dynamic. You can have that one. Feel better about yourself?
I think you feel better about the story than you're willing to let on because
on.
I ruined Harry Potter for you for 3 years.
Moving on.
Go ahead. You've got something. You said you had something.
Vampire Baseball. How do you feel about that?
So, this girl that shows up with those people.
Yes.
On page 375, her hair is a startling shade of red. On page 376, it's a brilliant orange. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if that's just bad writing. I don't know if maybe I'm being too picky.
All of the above. So we get this idea of Vampire Baseball. I don't know where I stand on it. Edward even tried to defend it, what's the great American pastime? And let's be honest, if there's anybody who's been around for America's pastime, we got it. It seems a little cheesy to me. But granted, this is a different family dynamic. Something like this is very endearing to them. They get to go out into, outside the sun, if you will. They get to be themselves, and they get to enjoy their company together. So I think it works for the story, as cheesy as it is. But when you first read it, it's a little uncomfortable. Excuse me for defending your book, but I think it's acceptable. It's a weird little scene, but I think it works only because they are who they are. And, it is clever that they go out into, the woods, the mountains, and they only play during the thunderstorm. So when they hit the ball, the crash is basically thunder. Cheesy again, but well thought out. So I think we have to suspend disbelief a little bit and give that to them. I think it's a workable scene, but upon first approach, it's a little cringeworthy. It's a little just, But I think there's merit in it. I think I can give it to her. You're welcome.
On page 383, there's a scene that makes me wonder how sentient is Stephanie Meyer of what she's writing.
Go on.
Let's just look at the options for a minute, Alice coaxed. The car slowed down again, more noticeably. Then suddenly we screeched to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. I flew against the harness and then slammed back into the seat. There are no other options, Edward hissed. I'm not leaving Charlie, I yelled. He ignored me completely. We have to take her back, Emmett finally spoke. No, Edward was absolute. He's no match for us, Edward. He won't be able to touch her. He'll wait. Emmett smiled. I can wait too. You don't understand. Once he commits to a hunt, he's unshakable. We'd have to kill him. Emmett didn't seem upset by the idea. That's an option. And the female, she's with him. If it turns into a fight, the leader will go with him too. There are enough of us. There's another option, Alice said quietly. Edward turned to her, fury, his voice a blistering snarl. There is no other option. Emmett and I both stared at him in shock, but Alice seemed unsurprised. The silence lasted for a long minute as Edward and Alice stared each other down. I broke it. Does anyone want to hear my plan? You smiled just then. That's a funny scene. She's funny there because she's so helpless, but she still has her agency to say, I've got a plan. Shut up. Well, I mean, there's this thing we could do. Shut up. Do you want to hear my plan? Shut up, right? Then you've got Emmett in his personality. He's the big bruiser. He wants to kill everybody.
Okay.
And then you've got Alice, who is very calm, very reserved, respectfully being the manager of the situation. And then you've got Edward, whose melodrama this is, being completely and ridiculously melodramatic. How sentient is Stephenie Meyer of the ridiculousness of Edward that she goes ahead and pulls the full schlock trigger with "there is no other option"?
Bold choice. I disagree with you. I don't think Bella's funny in the least, but okay, we can go with that.
So you've never read Jane Austen, right?
No.
There are a lot of moments like this in Jane Austen.
Is there?
Where something is completely and fully melodramatic, but the characters who are there are so wrapped up in what's going on, they don't see it. And because they don't see it, if you're just lost in the text,
You don't see it.
you don't see it either. If you're outside of the text, you're able to look at it and say, this one person is overselling everything.
Okay. We got to oversell it sometimes.
It's like Shatner.
I would like to interject. I think you're on a fine point, and that's fine. Someone in the comments said that we should have a Dalton Reads Austen series. No, we should not. Moving on.
We need to touch Jane Austen we need to read Jane Austen at some point during the life of this channel.
I will agree. I will give her credit. She is a great writer. She is considered a classic writer. She writes some big ones. We should read them.
Yeah.
But I just don't want to. I will agree with you, the melodrama. It does seem that Edward is over the top, and Stephenie Meyer is handling the situation quite well. She is. She's slinging things where they should be slung. I disagree with you that it's funny. It's not a funny scene.
How is
Bella
that not a funny scene?
She interjects the awkward silence by breaking and says, "Does anyone want to hear my plan?" She's being forgotten in this scene. It's not funny.
It's funny because she's being forgotten, and she's the one to break the big melodramatic silence I'm still here.
I will never understand your sense of humor. That's not funny.
That's
not
funny.
A funny scene. Absolutely not.
Edward and Bella are funny in this book.
No, they're not.
You're not giving any credit where credit is due.
Edward is occasionally witty. It is overdone. Absolutely.
Sure, it's overdone.
But it's overdone to make the point that he's witty. Bella is a dead rag of a character. I don't know what I was going with here. I was going with wet rag. I was going with something else.
Dead mouse.
She is awful as a character and will continue to be awful throughout the entirety of this series.
So tell me why she is an awful character.
Because she has no endearing characteristics. She has no real good personality.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you real quick to ask you a question. Did you see the movies?
Yes.
Are you basing this off of the portrayal in the movies?
No, though I think it's well done.
I think you're unfairly painting this with whoever that actress was.
Kristen Stewart?
Yes.
No, because there was a lot of grief when these movies came out. They're like, well, she's terrible. She's so bland. She's so dull. It's not good. No, that's how she's written.
No, it's not.
Kristen Stewart's not a bad actor. I've seen her do good shows.
She may be a great actress, or is it just actor now? I think they've rebranded everything as just actor now.
But it's not good, and she plays it well. It's dull. It's not exciting.
She had a crap take on the character, is all that means.
No,
I haven't seen the movies, so I can't say whether or not you're just getting lost in the hype of everything and everyone wanting to hate
She's not
Twilight.
a good character. She's dull. She's uninteresting. Her only real contribution to this is, as of now, well, she found some man who's relatively interesting to keep conversation going. Edward rules the conversation. He's the more witty one. He is the one who fuels conversation forward. All the points where you want to bring up things where they're going back and forth with questions, it's all Edward. Bella's just there for the ride. If she did not have Edward's dynamic to play off of, she is a boring and throwaway character. And not a good protagonist.
So, first off, you're not being fair because it is Bella that incites the entire novel.
Okay.
Second off, you're not being fair because what you're describing is a character that does not have agency within the text.
Okay.
Bella obviously has agency within the text. Bella has obviously played these scenarios in her mind more than we ever get on the page because of the way she reacts to things before her and Edward are cool, right?
No.
Yes.
No, she's a throwaway, terrible character.
She's not a throwaway, terrible character.
She is.
Then
she
how
contributes nothing to
How
this.
come Mike wants to marry her, and how come...
Well, ain't that the question? Everybody seems intrigued with her. Everyone is in love with her, but we're never shown why. Beyond the fact that she's just new to town.
Well, she's klutzy. And the love interest in a rom-com is always klutzy.
Okay.
So we're playing on real archetypes there. Archetypes of the genre with which one might not argue because the archetypes have to be exploited in one way or another, whether it is traditionally or ironically. And just because an archetype is being exploited traditionally versus ironically does not mean that character is a wet rag of a character, does not mean that it's a dead mouse of a character, does not mean that it is a throwaway character. It simply means that you are not skilled enough in the art of reading to pull anything from this text.
Well,
Dalton Gentry.
I guess we'll find out next week. Because we will continue forward with Adrian Reads Twilight. I'm excited about it. Chapters 19, 20, and 21 next week on Strip Cover Lit. Because we will be doing this series every single day up until the point where we are wrapping this series up.
Every week.
Every week. We do videos every day.
We do videos every day, and tomorrow
series every week.
You're in for a variety hour.
Always a good day. But if you like Adrian Reads Harry Potter, if you like Adrian Reads Twilight, we do this every single Wednesday here on Strip Cover Lit. And if you would like us help to pick the next piece of pop culture that Adrian will be reading, that will be coming very soon. We're getting close to the end of this novel.
Yeah.
We're going to need something coming next. So if you want to help us in that journey, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Give this video a like as well. Comment telling me that I'm right, this book is terrible. Team Dalton is always a great hashtag, if I may. I'm just going to pander a little bit here. Let that
Bunch
soak
of
in.
losers.
Let it soak in. And if you want to help us create more great content like this here on Strip Cover Lit, there's a link, as always, to our Patreon to be found in the description below.